Welcome to the BofA's Show, where the focus is on helping you grow and preserve your wealth. Join us as we discuss the craft of investing and uncover new and profitable ideas, all to help you grow wealthier and wiser. Better investing starts here.
BofA is the co-founder and chief investment officer at Cambria Investment Management. Due to industry regulations, he will not discuss any of Cambria's funds on this podcast. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Cambria Investment Management or its affiliates. For more information, visit CambriaInvestments.com.
There's a good phrase I saw in one of your reports talking about shift from everyone spending on tech to tech spending on everything, which I thought was such a unique and spot on comment with, tech companies investing in nuclear power plant type of utilities. What an interesting time we live in. What are some of the big themes you see for 2025 and perhaps beyond as far as kind of the macro and the economy and what's going on?
So everybody's worried about tariffs, but meanwhile, you've got this sort of very quiet but steady reshoring boom happening in the economy where, U.S. multinationals have been moving operating facilities, plant property, equipment, people, sourcing back to the U.S., which has created a little bit of inflation, but it's also created a lot of economic activity. And a lot of these companies that are building plant in the U.S. are tech companies. Tech companies are some of the most multinational, most globally exposed companies in the S&P 500. On top of that, you've got this AI boom where the bottleneck is power, and power means you got to build data centers and infrastructure around, just firing up all those chips. So I think what's interesting is that if you look at CapEx trends, the 20-year period before 2021, most companies in the S&P were spending CapEx. The only companies that weren't spending CapEx were tech companies, which were taking CapEx. And all the other companies were spending on tech. Now we've got an environment where tech companies are spending on energy and lumber and metals and, utilities, and commodity companies are actually taking in more CapEx. You've got sort of a higher structural demand for commodities from the idea that we're reshoring rather than moving stuff out of the U.S. into other areas. You've also got a lot more activity taking place on U.S. soil. So one thing that I thought was really interesting is that, I talk to our munis analyst every now and then, and I feel like our munis analyst has the most interesting data points right now, because what he's telling us is that the U.S. just got a whole bunch of activity dropped back onto it, right? Like after COVID, we all started driving way more than we used to because we could, and we were so sick of being at home. You have all this reshoring and, moving stuff from Canada to Mexico and lots of road use of the U.S. infrastructure. U.S. infrastructure is super old. We haven't seen a refurbishment cycle in the U.S. in a very long time. So what's happening is you're seeing accident rates, breakage, dams busting. You're seeing a lot of engineering concerns in a very short period of time. So I think what that is all telling us is when you drop a bunch of activity back on the US, when you've got AI, which is requiring building data centers and, every piece of dirt, every plot of soil in the US is potential for being turned into some kind of a harvester of power, that requires a much better infrastructure than what we're sitting on. So just that infrastructure refurbishment could be a profound investment theme over the next cycle.
I feel like people have been talking about this infrastructure upgrade for forever. But I was laughing because I was like, when was the last time someone said, all right, my muni analyst had something really interesting to say?
Exactly. Nobody talks to our munis analysts, but people should be talking to him.
They're in the basement. You got to go down all the way to, floor sub -3 to find the poor muni analyst. It's funny, by the way. So as you were talking about small caps earlier, your former boss had a great quote from last year where he said, when I got in this business, small caps were ripping. senior analysts followed the small cap stocks, and the large cap stocks were considered boring and followed by junior analysts, just to show how much things can change just by the regime and what's going on in the world. So who knows, maybe the muni analyst is going to be the star of the show.
I think that could happen. We haven't really seen a lot of activity in munis in a very, very long time. But now all of a sudden, I mean, if you think about it as a city, these cities are in a little bit of an arms race to have the best infrastructure and court all this new business to be built in their municipalities. So I think there are a lot of really interesting tentacles right now that are shifting from globalization and cheap capital to real hard assets, infrastructure spending. And it's not just about AI and power. There's also just, a replacement cycle in equipment that is necessary to see. I mean, I think, I was talking about productivity earlier, and I think productivity could mean many things. It could mean replacing people with AI, but it also could mean just taking your ancient equipment and upgrading it, right? And all of those things are part of what's likely to be in store for corporate America over the next cycle. But I think only one little slice of it, which is AI, is getting a lot of attention. And that's a much more sexy story than replacing farming equipment. But I think both of them are equally lucrative.
Podcast listeners will post show notes to today's conversation at mebfaber.com/podcast. If you love the show, if you hate it, shoot us feedback at themebfabershow.com. We love to read the reviews. Please review us on iTunes and subscribe to the show anywhere good podcasts are found. Thanks for listening, friends, and good investing.